Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. Our today's discussion is about the North-South Dialogue in the United Nations. Before discussing about North-South Dialogue in the United Nations, I want to explain you meaning of both terms. So it is very necessary to understand the meaning of the term North and South. The term North is generally used for words rich industrialized countries such as United States, Canada, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, and countries of Western Europe. Most of these countries have a very high per capita income and are members of an international organization and also members of Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. On the other hand, the second term, South related to the developing countries of the third world, or with the exception of some countries, the average per capita income of the people residing in these states is quite low. This distinction between the developed and underdeveloped countries made its appearance soon after the World War II. However, the concept was given concrete shape by the President Truman of USA in the course of his address to the US, and underdeveloped countries came to be universally recognized in course of time. However, the underdeveloped countries were also described as less developed countries, developing countries, or the third world countries. So, in a very simple way, you can understand that North and South dialogues, North and South differences indicated highly rich countries and as well as other block related to the developing countries or less developed countries or third world countries. So North and South, both terms used for economic point of view. North is used for rich industrialized countries and South is considered about developing countries or third world countries. After explaining you difference and meaning of North and South, now I explain you about further details regarding these terms or regarding this topic. The difference between the developed and underdeveloped countries remained very important in international politics. The developed countries made further progress. The conditions of developed countries not only made further progress, but the condition of the developed countries also did not show any improvement, resulting in a further increase in the gap between the developed and underdeveloped country. So in a very easy words, you can understand that rich countries did not show any improvement to fill the gap or to minimize the gap between developed and underdeveloped countries. The developing countries attributed this to the international economic order established after Second World War and its instruments like the GATT, GATT. GATT is abbreviation of General Agreement of Tariffs and Trade. GATT, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, or in other words, World Bank of IBRD. So, after Second World War, GATT, IMF, and World Bank play their important role to improve the economic condition of countries. It is true that the Bretton Woods structure created after the Second World War was quite flattering to the poor countries because it treated them on the basis of legal equality with the older industrial states. But in reality, this system worked to the disadvantage of the developing states or poor states because it treated them in an equal fashion even though they were not equal in economic terms. By ignoring the specific needs of these countries, this system perpetuated the existing inequalities. The IMF and the GATT hardly paid any attention to the needs of developing countries. Even World Bank or IBRD paid more attention to the construction of the war-torn economies of developed countries of Europe and took care of the needs of the poorer state of the world only afterwards. Only afterwards. So, contrary to the expectation of the framers of Bretton Woods in 1950s, the poorer nations did not take off despite injection of greater aid, and the trade of southern states continued to decline. The prices of raw materials continue to decline in relation to the prices of manufactured goods. Hence, the southern states had to produce more primary products to buy equipments for development or to buy processed and manufactured goods of any kind from the north or richer industrialized states. As a result, the economic conditions of southern states further deteriorated. By 1960s, the southern states came to hold the opinion that no improvement could take place in their position unless the present system of international trade was reformed. The developing countries raised debate at the various forums of the United Nations, and they formed pressure groups popularly known as Group of 77 and exerted necessary pressure on the various international economic relations and promote cooperation between the developed and developing countries. The members of the group of 77, though quite diverse in character, have been able to take an identical stand because they feel that the present international structure of economic relations is very unfair and they can get the best out of it only if they all act together. Further development in this regard was also can be explained through the non-aligned countries in September 1962 and non-aligned countries in the Belgrade Conference when the participant members desired that all the gains of scientific and technological revolution be applied in all fields of economic development to hasten the achievement of international justice. Again, at the Lusaka Conference in September 1970, the non-aligned countries formally declared about the rich and poor countries gap and about the obligation of the whole international community that is the duty of all countries to contribute to the rapid evolution of a new and just economic order which all nations can live without fear and raise to their full stature in the family of the nations. So, in the view of the growing demand from the underdeveloped countries for a better deal in the international community created the United Nations Conference of Trade and Development, UNCTAD. I repeat it again, United Nations Conference of Trade and Development, UNCTAD, an agency directly subordinate to the General Assembly. The UNCTAD held its first meeting at Geneva in the spring of 1964 with a view to continue the strengthened efforts for social and economic improvement. For this purpose, it laid emphasis on increased trade, establishment of tariffs favorable to third world products, agreement to check the falling new raw material to check the falling raw material prices. The developed countries gave an assurance to work in this direction. However, these assurances were not given concrete shape and the countries of third world passed a resolution and they attacked against the industrialized countries and formulated demands regarding the third world countries' custom, tariff, and other trade privileges with a view to improve their position in the world markets. They also condemned the prevailing trade conditions and abuses of development and asked for their modification to secure conditions of economic cooperation which were favorable to the developing countries. Once again, the developed countries failed to provide sufficient funds to the developing countries due to depending financial crises. This point is very important regarding this discussion, that a highly developed and industrialized countries failed to provide sufficient funds to the developing countries. This led to a feeling among the third world countries that they could not rely on the goodwill of their industrialized donors, and they redoubled pressure on the developed countries. They also took to the policy of self-reliance. In the another UNCTAD conference, the developing countries expressed their dissatisfaction with existing bilateral and multilateral assistance programs and succeeded in persuading the developed countries to reconsider their policies with a view to make the aid more effective. Actually, nothing concrete emerged as a result of different conferences. On the contrary, these conferences demonstrated the selfishness of the industrialized countries as well as the rich developing countries to pursue their own interest, their own economic interest. So, when in 1973 the Arab used the threat of oil power, then according to the different writers, the attitude of North underwent a perceptible change. This demonstration this demonstrated to the other southern states the commodity power and gave them a real bargaining level in international affairs. On the other hand, the advanced industrialized states were shaken by at the dramatic burst of oil power on to the international stage, and their fear that different actions regarding primary products might result in West being held to again to the future and made them more amenable to considering southern demands. All this convinced that the developing countries of the need of reducing their dependence on the industrialized countries. This view was expressed both within the United Nations and outside the United Nations in different conferences. So, the confrontation between North and South always remained an important factor in the world politics, because industrialized countries also realized the serious implications of the widening gap between the developed and developing countries and felt that these unbearable imbalances may prove explosive. They felt the need of plenary strategy to organize and implemented organic growth of the world as a whole on a balanced and diversified basis. During this discussion about North-South dialogues in the United Nations, and during this discussion, another most important aspect now I explain you, and that is about new international economic order. United Nations General Assembly, in its sixth special session in 1974, called for the establishment of new international economic order, NIEO. I repeat it again, NIEO. Abbreviation is the New International Economic Order. The New International Economic Order, or NEO, and approved a program of action to achieve it. The call for the creation of new international economic order was an acknowledgement of the fact that the existing international economic order was defective insofar as it perpetuated and aggravated international inequalities, and that new relationship of interdependence should replace the older pattern of dependence and unequal exchange. It was argued that the rich developed countries are morally obliged to increase and facilitate the flow of resources to less developed countries, and that it was in their self interest to encourage the promotion of growth and development of the poor countries insofar as they would provide them expanded markets. The program of action endorsed by the United Nations for the achievement of new international economic order was quite wide and covered diverse sectors like raw materials and primary commodities, food, trade, transportation, insurance, the international monetary system, development financing, industrialization, transfer of technology, activities of transnational corporations, cooperation between the developing countries, and above all, the role of the United Nations. So, new international economic order can be considered a major contribution of the United Nations to minimize the gap between rich and poor states. During the during the during this process about functioning developing and developed states regarding the new international economic order gained great popularity and support. No doubt some of the industrially developed countries did not receive the idea with much betterment, hopefully, but ultimately some countries played their important role and support to this idea. The monetary and financial crisis which confronted these countries also greatly contributed to their changed thinking. Ultimately, the industrially developed countries thought it better to try to manage rather than to resist change in their relations with the developing world. The developing countries also held a series of conferences to give concrete shape to the proposals for the transformation of the new international economic order in reality. In this direction, the first step was the Conference of Southern Countries at Dakar in 1975. The proposals adopted here were subsequently incorporated in the Lima Declaration issued by the Second General Conference of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization in Peru in March 1975. In December 75, Conference on International Economic Cooperation CIEC Conference on International Economic Cooperation started in Paris, in which 19 developing countries of the OPEC countries and other developed countries like United States, Japan, Canada, Australia, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, and countries of European community took part. This conference could not achieve any substantial results and was terminated in 1977. Different other conferences relating about North-South dialogues, although cannot become very effective and not become very effective to minimize the gap between rich and poor states, but the process and the growing demand from the less developed countries in the United Nations, the United Nations General Assembly adopted a resolution in 1979, which has been described a watershed in the struggle of the developing countries for new international economic order. Regarding this resolution emphasized on the need of global talks within the framework of the United Nations on the energy, raw materials, trade developments, currency, and financial questions. It also decided that the negotiations should be action oriented and should ensure a comprehensive, integrated approach to the issue under these negotiations and should take place important with the demands of the United Nations system. It insisted that different committees, commissions, negotiation committees, different recommendations, procedures, all these must be accordingly about the betterment of the developing states and their better futures, and also for the promotion of their economic stability. Under the umbrella of the United Nations, many conferences, many meetings remained in process, and one point is very clear regarding this discussion, and that is all these conferences, committees, and North-South dialogues related negotiations not become very helpful. And we also find out that process and progress remained very slow, and much progress had not been made in the North-South dialogues. There are number of factors which become a cause for the slow progress in this regard or in the process of North-South dialogues. One point is very important that the attitude of the North states not been remained very supportive to the developing countries. The developed countries have tended to favor status quo, or they adopted passive approach, and generally they ask the South to propose subjects for negotiations, and once the proposals are submitted, they aggregate the technical defects of the proposals and thereby delay their detailed considerations, and then those proposals sometimes rejected or criticized. So this conflict in attitude of North states has generated mistrust about the basic attainment of purposes of developing countries. And other a most important point regarding the critical aspects of North-South dialogues in the United Nations. And next and another point is that the reluctance of the North to share power in the management of international economic institutions has been another stumbling block. The developed countries have justified the existing arrangements on the grounds of different reasons, and they introduced far-reaching changes. On the other hand, the developing countries are keen to share greater power. No doubt, certain changes have been too few and too slow and were carried out only in the face of an impending threat. Next critical aspect and um, not very supportive aspect, the existing institutions arrangements also stand in the way of progress in the North-South negotiations. Both the parties have tried to confine the negotiation in those parts of the system which are very important and which are amendable to their control and the making of things more complicated. So different complications were created by the South, by the South or by the most developed countries or by the North, and South always suffered many problems from the North. Next point is South has favored a universal multilateral system of public negotiations which gives weightage to the members. It insists on comprehensive negotiations covering a packages of issues. Further, it has insisted that needs, equality, and redistribute justice rather than power should form the basis of any settlement. On the other hand, North has shown preference for bilateral negotiation and considers multilateral diplomacy undesirable for North-South dialogues on technical as well as political grounds. So, it has shown preference for specific and issue-oriented negotiation. Next point of our this discussion is that North has preferred substantive negotiations on economic issues within the forums like IMF, World Bank, WTO, World Trade Organization, and United Nations, other subsidiary agencies, bodies, and institutions. And in all these institutions, South remained deprived and North has attained maximum their own economic interest because they have greater influence all these institutions like IMF, World Bank, and WTO, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. So it is a remain a major cause for the slow progress and for the deterioration of the developing countries' economies. Next point is that process of decision making also play very important role. Generally, the decisions are taken by majority vote, which leads to politicization of issues rather than cooperation. This point is also very important regarding this discussion because politicization of issues by major powers also created complication for developing and poor nations of third world countries. Next most important point is that the group system on the basis of which North-South negotiations are conducted has also greatly affected the negotiation process. And negotiation process sometimes attained influence of major powers. Lastly, the universal nature of negotiations in which all member states participate has also contributed to the showpiece of negotiations. Usually, after long negotiating conferences, decisions are taken only on one or two issues. In other words, the complex, this is very concluding point of this discussion, very important and concluding point of this discussion. In other words, the complex North-South negotiating process has greatly stood in the way of achieving an effective result. If some fruitful results are desired, wide ranging and fundamental changes must be effected in the process of negotiations. It should be made more informal and flexible. So, while concluding this discussion, not only in the history of United Nations and regarding the North-South dialogues in the United Nations as international organization played its very important role to promote the basic issues of developing nations or third world countries, developing nations, and United Nations through the platform, through the forum of the United Nations, different subsidiary bodies of the United Nations tried their best to minimize the gap between rich and poor countries and gap between North and South countries. But many hurdles remained, many critical aspects remained important in the achievement of uh, different economic interest of the developing states. If we, in the light of this discussion, if we examine in present period, then we also find out that still the role of IMF and the role of World Bank remained very, very influential in the making of budgets, in the making of economic policies of majority of the third world countries and majority of developing poor countries. So it is very necessary for the big powers, highly rich and industrialized countries to play their vital role for the betterment, for the stability of the countries of developing developing countries and of the population betterment of population, better living standards of population, and to work for the betterment of their economies. And that is the end of this discussion.